We live in an extraordinary age in human history. We have the means at our disposal to eradicate hunger, eradicate poverty, dramatically reduce illness and disease, and to access critical information at a speed and ease that a mere 30 years ago was unthinkable. So, what's going wrong? Why do we still have poverty, hunger, illness, and disease, and so much misinformation? That misinformation has resulted in people doubting the very truth in front of them. Truth that less than 10 years ago, anyone who raised doubt about would have been at best laughed at. I once heard from a very wise priest that the evil one does his most effective work in the gaps or division between people. We also happen to live in an age where there is a lot of division. There is a growing divide in this country and this world. There is a lot of judgment, a lot of condemnation, and a whole lot more exaggeration, sensationalism, and extremism. So where can we go to regroup? To whom can we go for answers to bring more unity? Where can we go to find our way back to a path that ultimately leads us to a more peaceful existence? You'd expect me to say that we need to go to Jesus. You would not be wrong, for that is indeed true. We do have an intermediary, someone who can help us find Jesus and can help us to actually be able to better hear what he is telling us. That intermediary, that helpful person, is Mary. We have to call upon Mary and ask for her help. She will help us find the path to Jesus. In today's gospel, Jesus is showing us that we have all been informed about and invited to something totally wonderful, something spectacular. The reality is we have to accept God's invitation and actually take steps to get there. In no small way, we are like the wedding guests we heard about in the gospel, who have been invited and ignore the invitation. At best, we periodically ignore the invitation. At worst, we condemn or use hateful language or actions towards those trying to remind us of the invitation we have been extended. Today in the Holy Land, people are being killed. Their deaths are at the very heart of thousands of years of misunderstanding and division. At least it appears that way on the surface. In reality, the average person living out their existence in the Holy Land may in fact not be seeking violence. I heard of a Jewish man who frequently would drive into Gaza to help Palestinians seeking medical care in Israel by driving them to their appointments and treatments. Israeli citizens could much more easily enter into and leave Gaza versus the Palestinians. He'd done this for years and developed friendships with those Palestinians. That same man was a victim of the horrors perpetrated by Hamas. Now the resulting bloodshed brings about more anger, fear, and hatred. This is exactly what the evil one wants. The more we do this to each other, the more satisfied the evil one becomes. He loves when we are afraid, when we are fearful, when we have doubts, and when we turn on each other. Fear can lead to anger, anger can lead to hate, and hate always leads to suffering. What is the antidote, the cure, if you will, for all of this ugliness? Understanding. We have to be willing to get out of our comfort zones and make the attempt to understand each other. People from a variety of beliefs with a big footprint in social media, mainstream media, and other outlets want you to be afraid. They aren't willing to listen, nor do they want to develop an understanding for other people, other cultures, other beliefs, and other ways of life. Instead, they happily point out things they consider to be flaws worthy of our condemnation. Nowhere in the Sermon on the Mount or anything Jesus said and did was he advocating for us to recklessly condemn. Instead, he invites us to love. Love one another as I have loved you is what he commanded. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, is what he said on the cross. Jesus has opened the very door to eternal salvation. So much of Jesus' earthly ministry was focused on pointing out to us how to walk through that door. He showed us the way. Right now, on the very ground that Jesus showed us this way, people are engaged in the very opposite of that way. As we know all too well, this is not a new thing in the Middle East or in any other region of the world. There are times in which we humans engage in acts of violence and hatred that impacts generations. My parents grew up in Germany during the Second World War. They were the children that had to witness unspeakable horrors and be faced with sudden and dramatic wake-ups in the dead of night to escape to a bomb shelter or travel hundreds of miles to escape armed men willing to kill innocent children and to terrorize. This happened 75 years or more ago. It still affects them to this day. War impacts everyone, and that includes the men and women fighting as members of the military. It is no accident that some of the most passionate promoters for peace and understanding are, in fact, combat veterans. At times like this, when things this bad happen so far away, we may think that there's nothing we can do. That might not be entirely true. The world is indeed much smaller than ever. Father Healy, having been there in the Holy Land, certainly gives us a moment to pause and consider how directly we might have been impacted. You heard the good news that he's on his way home. Keep praying for him. My oldest daughter, Magdalena, is the development director for the Jewish Community Center in Allentown, Pennsylvania. This is a special place. She's a Catholic young woman serving in a very Jewish context. Interestingly, a few years back, that same Jewish community center welcomed a group of Muslims who were very interested in using their squash courts. Think about this. Muslims being members of a Jewish community center with a Catholic development director. Right. Needless to say, the recent events have shaken them all to the core. Many of the staff and members have family in Israel. Too many have lost loved ones due to the latest violence. This feels very close and very direct to my daughter. Consequently, we feel how this impacts her. You see, we're all a whole lot more connected than we might realize. God has invited us to something totally wonderful, something spectacular, much like the wedding celebration we heard about today. That something is our eternal salvation. We need to encounter Jesus. The road to that salvation begins with a single step. What step will you take? Will you accept the generous offer from God to encounter his son Jesus? That person in today's parable who was thrown out for not wearing the proper wedding garment might puzzle us. He received, actually, as a gift, the garment from the king who invited him, and he chose not to wear it anyway. At our baptism, we are given a garment, and it is not the white one we wore. It is the garment of us being marked for Christ. It is the garment of us being willing to proclaim the gospel, the good news. It is the garment, as St. Paul said, putting on the armor of light. The light is the light of Christ, and we are called to reflect that light to the world that so desperately needs it. There is something we can do that is simple but powerful. We need to call upon Mary. How do we do that? We pray. Let us all commit to something that absolutely, and I guarantee you it will, it'll make a difference. Let us commit to saying 3 Hail Marys every single day. 1 in the morning, 1 at midday, and 1 in the evening. If we do that, Mary will help us all to hear her son, and then we will be on our way to that wedding banquet.